All right, so today we are diving into something pretty juicy.
Oh yeah, this one's a doozy.
This is the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni saga.
Buckle up.
We've got a ton of Reddit threads on this whole legal battle that's going on between them, stemming from the movie adaptation of It Ends With Us, that Colleen Hoover book.
Oh yeah, big bestseller.
Huge. And it's a lot to untangle, so we're going to try to make sense of it all for everyone.
Yeah, like walking you through the chaos.
Exactly. And it's interesting because there's this whole backdrop of Colleen Hoover and her popularity, especially with younger readers who may not have been super into like the whole fan fiction world, which we can get into in a bit.
Right, right. It's almost like there's this whole group of readers who are experiencing these kinds of tropes and themes maybe for the first time.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes this whole Lively Baldoni thing so fascinating because Hoover's work itself is kind of controversial, right?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you look at those Reddit threads and it's clear people either love her or they think her books are really problematic.
Yeah, there are a lot of criticisms about her writing, people saying it's like overly reliant on tropes or that it deals with some themes in a way that's not great.
Yeah, and some people even compare her style to like poorly written fan fiction.
Which, for those who don't know,
Oh yeah, good point.
what is fan fiction? Just in case.
Yeah, so basically fan fiction is when fans take characters or settings from their favorite books or movies or TV shows and they write their own stories with them.
So it's like this whole online universe of fan-created content.
Exactly. Like, what if this happened? Or what if these two characters got together? That kind of thing.
That's so interesting. Okay, so back to Lively and Baldoni.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this controversial author, a movie adaptation, and now these two stars are in this huge legal battle.
It's a recipe for drama, for sure.
And social media is like throwing fuel on the fire.
Oh, absolutely. Social media just magnifies everything.
So to kind of set the scene, the movie premiered in August 2024. And right away, fans noticed that there was some serious tension between Lively and Baldoni.
Right, like skipping red carpets, not following each other on social media, classic signs.
Exactly. And it was all over the internet.
Oh, yeah. Gossip sites, fan forums. Everyone was dissecting every little thing.
And it was amazing to me how quickly people started forming opinions, even with so little information.
It's like that with everything now, though, right? Everyone's so quick to judge.
It reminded me of that whole Depp and Heard trial, where it felt like everyone just picked a side immediately.
And then dug in their heels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems like in this case, a lot of people were quick to side with Baldoni and paint Lively as the difficult one.
It's that tendency to just latch on to a narrative even when you don't have all the facts.
And it's easy to get swept up in it all, especially when social media is feeding you a constant stream of opinions and hot takes.
Social media is such an echo chamber sometimes.
So things were already messy. But then Lively filed this formal complaint alleging that Baldoni had sexually harassed her on set.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big deal.
Huge, and it definitely made people start to rethink their initial assumptions.
Yeah, it got a lot more complicated.
So, according to Lively's complaint, Baldoni was showing her inappropriate content and making her uncomfortable with his behavior.
That's pretty serious stuff.
And there were even reports that she asked him to sign this return-to-work document, basically outlining acceptable behavior on set.
Like setting boundaries.
Exactly. So it was clearly more than just a personality clash.
Yeah, that's not something you just do lightly.
And Baldoni, he denied everything and he filed a countersuit against her.
Oh, wow. So he's going on the offensive.
Yeah. And to make things even more complicated, he sued the New York Times for libel.
Wait, what? Why the New York Times?
Well, they published an article detailing Lively's accusations and Baldoni's claiming they left out important context and were biased in their reporting.
Interesting. So it's a battle over the narrative, essentially.
Exactly. And this is where things get really juicy because a big part of this whole case revolves around text messages between Lively and Baldoni.
Oh, the text messages. That's always where the tea is spilled.
Right. And both sides are claiming that these messages prove their version of events.
So it's like a digital he said, she said situation.
Exactly. And this is where we need to dive deep into those messages and see what they actually reveal.
Let's get into it.
This is where it gets good.
Okay, so these text messages, they're really at the heart of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's like everyone's waiting for that smoking gun text, the one that just proves everything.
Right, and both sides are saying they have it.
But it feels like we're only seeing snippets, right?
Oh.
Like little pieces of a much larger conversation.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so tricky because it's easy to take things out of context.
And it's almost impossible to know for sure what the tone or intent was behind each message.
Exactly. Like, was it sarcastic? Was it serious? We're missing those nonverbal cues that you get in a face-to-face conversation.
So let's start with one of the big ones that Baldoni's team keeps bringing up. There's this text where Lively apparently invites Baldoni into her trailer while she's pumping breast milk.
Right. And they're saying this proves that she wasn't uncomfortable with him being in her space.
Which directly contradicts her claim that he entered her trailer without permission and made her feel uncomfortable.
It does raise questions for sure.
Yeah, if that's true, it kind of undermines that part of her story.
But even if that specific instance is misrepresented, it doesn't necessarily invalidate her other claims.
Right, we can't just focus on one message and
Yeah.
ignore everything else.
Exactly. You have to look at the whole picture.
So what else do these messages show?
Well, there's this exchange where Baldoni and his publicist, Melissa Nathan, they seem to be making light of some negative press coverage surrounding Lively.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that.
On the surface, it looks pretty bad, like they're celebrating her misfortune.
And this is what Baldoni's team is saying was taken out of context.
Yeah, they're arguing that it was all sarcastic, that they were just venting frustration.
But sarcasm is so hard to convey through text.
Oh, I know it can lead to so many misunderstandings.
Like, how many times have you sent a text and then worried that the other person might read it the wrong way?
All the time. It's like you can't hear the tone of voice or see the facial expressions, so it's easy for things to get misinterpreted.
Especially in a high-pressure environment like a film set, I can only imagine.
Right. Everyone's stressed. There are deadlines. It's a recipe for miscommunication.
So even if we can't take these messages at face value, what can we learn from them?
Well, I think they do give us some insight into the dynamics between Lively and Baldoni.
Like, were they friendly? Were they professional?
And I think they highlight how easily communication can break down when you're relying solely on text.
It's like a reminder to be careful about what you put in writing because you never know how it might be interpreted later.
Especially in this day and age where everything is documented and can be shared so easily.
Okay, so these messages are messy, they're open to interpretation, but they are still evidence, right?
Right. And the legal teams will be arguing about their admissibility and their significance in relation to the case.
So it's not just about what the messages say, but also about how they're used in court.
Exactly. It's a whole other layer of complexity.
It's like a legal strategy on top of the personal drama.
And it highlights why it's so important to be cautious about jumping to conclusions.
Because we're only seeing a small part of the story.
And we don't know the full context.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with only a few pieces.
And sometimes those pieces can be misleading.
It makes you wonder if we'll ever really know the truth.
It's hard to say. I mean, even with all this evidence, it's still ultimately a he said, she said situation.
And with both sides so invested in their own version of events, it's going to be tough to sort out what really happened.
I think that's what makes this whole case so fascinating. It really speaks to the power of narrative and how easily perception can be manipulated.
And it makes me think about that tendency we have to want to find a clear-cut villain, someone to blame.
Right, like we want a simple answer. Good guy and a bad guy.
But real life is rarely that neat and tidy.
Definitely not in this case.
So with all this ambiguity and these conflicting narratives, how do we even begin to make sense of this whole thing?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge our own biases.
You mean like those initial reactions we talked about earlier where people instantly sided with Baldoni?
Exactly. Those gut feelings, they can be so powerful, but they're often based on very limited information and our own preconceived notions.
And once we form an opinion, it can be hard to change our minds, even when presented with new evidence.
Right. It's that confirmation bias. We tend to seek out information that confirms what we already believe.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Well, it takes conscious effort. You have to be willing to challenge your own assumptions and to consider the possibility that you might be wrong.
And to be open to different perspectives.
Exactly, even those that make you uncomfortable.
And it seems like Baldoni's legal team is really trying to control the narrative here. They're not just focused on the legal arguments, they're also trying to win over the public.
Yeah, it's a tactic we've seen before, most notably in the Depp trial.
It's like they're trying to bypass the legal system and go straight for the court of public opinion.
And social media makes that so much easier.
It's like a megaphone for their message.
And it can be really hard to resist getting swept up in it all.
I remember feeling so conflicted during the Depp trial. It was like everyone had an opinion, and it was so hard to know what to believe.
It's that echo chamber effect again.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we need to be critical of the information we're consuming.
And to remember that there are real people at the center of this.
Right. This isn't just some abstract legal battle. These are people's lives and reputations that are at stake.
It's easy to forget that when you're caught up in the drama.
So what can we do? How do we navigate this complex landscape and avoid getting lost in the noise?
I think it starts with acknowledging that we don't have all the answers
Like admitting that we might be wrong.
and being open to changing our minds as new information comes to light.
It's about embracing the uncertainty.
And being willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing.
It's not easy, but it's important.
Definitely. And I think it's also about remembering that this case is still unfolding.
Like we're in the middle of this story.
And there are still so many unanswered questions.
So we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
And avoid contributing to the spread of misinformation.
It's about respecting the legal process.
And allowing the truth to emerge in its own time.
This whole thing with Baldoni's strategy, it really feels familiar, right? Like we've seen this before.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely giving some serious Depp Heard vibes.
Exactly. Like it feels like he's trying to win in the court of public opinion. Maybe even more than he's trying to win in the actual court.
And in a way, he's already kind of doing that right. I mean, we're here talking about it, and everyone on Reddit is talking about it, so to a certain extent, it's working.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, is that the point? Is it less about actual legal arguments and more about just creating this cloud of confusion?
Well, there's a term for that, actually. It's called the fire hose of falsehood technique.
Whoa. Okay, break that down for me.
So basically, it's this idea that you overwhelm people with so much information that it becomes impossible to sort out what's true and what's not.
So it's not just about lying, it's about drowning people in noise.
Exactly. And social media is the perfect platform for this kind of thing.
Oh, totally. It's like everyone has a megaphone now, and it's so easy to just blast out whatever message you want.
And when you're dealing with a situation like this that's already so emotionally charged, it can be really hard to stay objective.
Right, because people are looking for answers. They want to know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy.
And this strategy plays into that because it makes it really hard to figure out who to believe.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is on fire.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So how do we protect ourselves from this? How do we avoid getting sucked into that vortex of misinformation?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware that this is happening.
Like knowing that this is a tactic that people use.
Exactly, because once you know about it, you can start to look for the signs.
So what are the signs? What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, one big red flag is when someone presents themselves as having all the answers.
Like they're the only one who knows the truth.
Right, and they often demonize anyone who disagrees with them.
And they tend to rely on emotional appeals rather than actual evidence.
It's about stirring up outrage and creating a sense of us versus them.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we become more savvy consumers of information?
Well, for starters, diversify your sources.
Don't just get your news from one place.
Exactly. Read different newspapers, listen to different podcasts, get your information from a variety of sources.
And be willing to engage with viewpoints that you might not agree with?
Exactly, because that's how you start to see the bigger picture.
And how do we know if a source is credible?
Look for evidence-based reporting, not just opinions.
And fact check.
Oh yeah, fact-checking is crucial.
There are so many websites and organizations dedicated to debunking misinformation.
And don't be afraid to question everything, even the things you think you already know.
Because sometimes what seems obvious might not be the whole truth.
And be patient.
Don't feel like you have to have an opinion on everything right away.
It's okay to say, I don't know, or I need more information.
And remember that this case is still ongoing. There are still so many unanswered questions.
And the legal process can take a long time.
So let's try to resist the urge to rush to judgment.
And to remember that everyone deserves a fair hearing.
This whole situation has been really eye-opening, and I
Yeah.
think it's a good reminder that we need to be careful about what we believe,
And that we need to be critical thinkers.
especially in today's world where information spreads so quickly.
We have a responsibility to be informed and to be thoughtful about the information we share.
So let's try to approach this and all the other complex issues out there with a healthy dose of skepticism
And empathy,
and a commitment to seeking truth and understanding.
even when it's difficult.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a wild ride, but hopefully you've learned something along the way.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, stay curious, stay critical, and always keep an open mind.